Today's episode of Crossfire Faith and Gaming is with special guest host Brian Swift. I also want to shout out to our Patreon sponsor at the silver level. That is Lonnie White. So thank you to Lonnie and to all of our Patreon supporters. You can find out more about that all at our website at crossfirepodcast.com. And now, without any further ado, here is our show. Today on our talk, we've got news about McLarens, news about VR headsets, news about Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic and Gamescom and what to expect there, and how pop culture influences our actual everyday technology. So stick around after the introduction for that and a whole lot more. This is Reverend David Petty, and I am joined by my co-host for this week. We've got a special guest, as Russ has taken care of some personal stuff. So our special guest this week, we've got Brian Swift, who joins us from Billings, Montana. And Brian, why don't you just say a little bit about yourself, what angle you're taking on video games and faith?
Yeah, so I've been playing video games for a long time, since I was a kid, which was forever ago. I'm old. I kind of got started with the NES, and I've been playing games since then. I love strategy games and so on. That's really my main focus. Anything that doesn't require, like Twitch response are the kind of games that I love. That's partly because, my reflexes aren't as good as they used to be. Faith-wise, I'm also a part of Crossfire, attending a local church here at Billings, which we love.
Excellent.
That's kind of my background.
It's great to have you on the podcast, helping me anchor this podcast today. So I'm going to jump right into today's news, but I'm going to let you bring us the first topic about Star Wars. So tell us what's going on with Star Wars.
Yeah. So the Knights of the Old Republic remake looks like it's in some trouble. It looks like they're changing developers, so they're dropping Asper Media, who was working on the game, and it looks like they're going to switch development to Saber Interactive's Eastern European studios. That's according to this Bloomberg article that we're looking at here. Any thoughts, David?
Yeah, I mean, from the moment I heard that they were remaking Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, I got very excited. You can look back at our podcast or our live recording that Russ and I did back when they announced the Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic remake. And especially as a full-on remake, I think there were a lot of people excited about this old game that was very meaningful for their lives and a very compelling story, and that they were going to remake this whole thing. But then all of the news was like, well, apparently, Disney or Star Wars folks were not happy with what they saw in the development, or were not happy perhaps with how much development was happening, or perhaps not happening. And so they yanked it from Aspire Media and said, it's going to go. At first, it was talked about that it was going to be yanked from Aspire Media. And so everybody was thinking, well, is this like a total refresh? Or you just like, all right, everybody back to the drawing board. We're going to take 3 more years to make this thing. Or in this case, it looks like they're going to yank it and give it to a whole other studio with Saber Interactive. So I don't really know enough about Saber Interactive to speak at length about what games have come out of their European studios. But I just think this is, probably at this point we would just put Knights of the Old Republic in the back of our memories, and we'll just wait until we see more. So sorry, everybody that got excited. You're going to have to wait a little bit more. So next up in the news,
I was going to say, this is a game that I played on the OG Xbox, and definitely loved this game. I thought at the time that this was one of the most Star Wars feeling Star Wars thing that had come out to that point. I thought that the developer at the time really nailed like the feel of the Star Wars universe. And that was a really fun game to play and just like feel like I was in that universe for the time that I spent with it. So hopefully when they finish this remake, they can really do it justice.
Yeah, and there was a lot of talk when they first announced it, how interesting, because it was going to be a PlayStation exclusive. So this game that came out as an Xbox exclusive, because of the changing of hands, was now going to be a PlayStation exclusive, but that's only going to be if and when it actually comes out. So speaking of Sony and PlayStation, Sony is getting sued for £5 billion. It looks like this article says. I'm guessing, probably 5 point something billion dollars. $5.9 billion says over the price of its online PlayStation Store prices. They are claiming that Sony is overcharging consumers and abusing its position as the primary seller of PlayStation games digitally. So I'm just curious, how does one go about filing a $6 billion lawsuit against Sony? And, is this one of those they're going to ask for $6 billion and they're going to be really happy when they're able to, I'm assuming this is a class action lawsuit. So what? Sony's
I would assume with that big a number. Yeah.
So he's going to pay out $15 in PlayStation dollars to how is this going to go down? Do you think, let me ask two questions for you, Brian. Do you think Sony games are too expensive? Do you think all games are too expensive? And what do you think about this lawsuit?
I'm going to make probably an unpopular argument that games are actually probably not expensive enough, at least in terms of if you're going to buy a game once, which is, I like to buy games and not pay a little at a time in, extra fees and so on and micro transactions and all that. I'd rather just buy the game and own it. So, my argument is kind of like, I think honestly games are probably too cheap, which again, probably isn't popular, but I think the other thing is games are really going in the subscription direction. And so I'm looking forward to, to that playing out. I think that's a better, a better model certainly for gamers. It'll be interesting to see if it works out for the companies. They're trying to pull it off.
Yeah, I think, and it's also weird in a space where there is definitely not a monopoly here. There are plenty of other places to go, plenty of other places to get games. Sony is not the only one making video games. And right. So to say that because they make games that they are the exclusive owners and distributors of, that they have priced themselves too expensive, that's like me saying Apple is selling iPhones and they're too expensive, and so I'm going to sue them for selling me expensive iPhones. I just don't know how that plays out. I don't know if they're hoping. My guess is they're probably hoping Sony says, look, we'll settle this for a few $1 million, just go away, because it's not worth the bad PR to have Sony's name in the news. But I can't imagine this actually settling out. That's just wild. But anyway.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it'll work. I suspect that that this lawsuit will fail. It doesn't seem like these sorts of lawsuits don't seem to have played out so far. I know that, there's been some lawsuits over the Apple Store and so on, and this kind of exclusivity issue that we have with these walled gardens. So I'm not sure that this will go anywhere, but it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah. So next up, why don't you bring us that one, Brian?
Yeah, next up I think is the She-Hulk premiere. I haven't seen it yet, but I think David has. Apparently, it's pretty good.
Yeah, so I did see it. It's pretty good, and I watched it with my family. I got to say, there's some interesting things in there that, there's a discussion about whether or not Captain America is a virgin or not, which, I will say, we discussed virginity in terms of, the Virgin Mary in church, but, perhaps a little different to discuss Captain America. So, that was the only kind of questionable content in my mind. I thought it did a really good job kind of addressing anger and how it's viewed from masculine versus feminine perspectives, right? And kind of culturally how anger is one of the only acceptable emotions that men can show. And yet if a woman gets angry, it's often thought of like, oh, well, you're just being bossy, or you're being, and that how terrible that is for women. So there's some interesting commentary on that, how they go about it. But overall, I think it was pretty good. great to see Mark Ruffalo on the screen again as the Hulk, and I'm curious to see where they go with it, especially as a show that is, supposed to be kind of a lawyer show. But they spent the first part of the first episode just kind of explaining how she got to be She-Hulk in the first place. So is this a show you're going to watch, Brian, or what do you think?
I think I will watch it. I've watched all the Marvel stuff on Disney Plus so far, so I don't think I'll make an exception here. But I do have a bit of a backlog that I need to catch up on. I've had kind of a busy summer, so I will get to it eventually. I wanted to touch on the topic in terms of the virginity angle. I know that, within our culture, there's kind of a virginity shaming thing that goes on. And I wondered the tone of that comment that was made in the show. Do you feel like that, that it was taking that angle?
Well, I think I'm going to give a Marvel spoiler alert here for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. If you haven't watched Endgame yet, or I don't even know where it is in the series, but anyway, she talks about that, that Captain America died, right? And that it's so sad when she thinks back about it that through all those years, he was so busy saving the world that he probably never got the chance to be with a woman, right? Or, to lose his virginity, so to speak. And so she's like, I just think it's tragic that this happened. And, so they're discussing it in the car with, she's discussing it in the car with Mark Ruffalo's character, of course, Bruce Banner. And, then the whole thing takes the conversation off. Then there's a little after credits scene, and I'll just give it away here. But, Bruce Banner basically says, listen, back in 1943 on the USO tour, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And she goes, oh my gosh, it's true. He's not a virgin. I can't believe it. So I do think there was there's a comment that it would have been a shame to die a virgin, right? So, that would be interesting to get like a Catholic perspective on chastity, right? But I'm sure there's a whole other perspective that, depending on where you're at in different churches, on premarital sex or any other sorts of things that could come up in that conversation. But really such a minor side note of the show. So, but it is the period that the show ends on. So, or at least the after credits scene. You'll have to watch it and tell me what you think. So, speaking of things on TV, I just got a chance to see the first teaser of the HBO series The Last of Us, based on the game that came out for PlayStation many, many years ago and then got remastered and now is getting remade. And it's getting remade at the same time it's getting made into a TV show. Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey are in this. It's also exciting. Nick Offerman is in this as Bill. I'm excited. I think Pedro Pascal has been in mostly great movies and shows. I think Bella Ramsey also, we saw her in the Game of Thrones way back when. My kids also watched this show called The Worst Witch that they really enjoyed, that she was in. She also, I understand, took kind of a brief break from acting in order to just kind of care for her mental health, which I super applaud. So I think, the fact that she's in here as Ellie for The Last of Us is very exciting. And then Nick Offerman as Bill. So I'm really excited about that. I'm excited to see where they go with it. I'm excited for more people to experience that story. Obviously not a kid-friendly story, so parents beware. It is definitely going to be rated TV MA. And yet at the same time, I would say if you're old enough to watch it, it has some amazing character moments, and it's got such a good, compelling story and so much heart to it that don't let the zombies infected by fungus take you away from it, because there's so much heart in this story that I hope that they're able to communicate through the HBO series. So what do you think, Brian? Is this a show you're going to watch? Are you going to care about? Are you going to wait until you get a PlayStation to go play the first game? What do you think?
Yeah, so for me, I don't tend to watch a lot of super violent content. I'll have to kind of play this by ear, but I do think, based on the games and the critical response from, The Last of Us that we've seen so far, that this source material is super rich, and I think, really should serve as a great basis to kick off from and create, new content, create a show that I think has a chance to be really critically acclaimed as well. And, hopefully for the fans of that series, they really do it justice, because certainly the games are beloved. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I really hope so. Given the at length that Russ and I have talked on our show about how bad movie adaptations have been of games, I think TV, maybe with the episodic and much longer length, you've got a game that usually is 20 to 40 hours worth of game content. And maybe in that 40 hours, you do have 10 hours worth of dialogue and what's the word I'm looking for? Story, right? You've got 10 hours worth of story. So I think that episodic television makes a lot more sense than like trying to cram 40 hours worth of gameplay into an hour and 30-minute movie. But, I really hope they do it well, and I have high hopes, so we'll see.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right that it's much easier to take, especially some of the kind of memorable sequences, and because you have a longer runtime, you have more of an opportunity to really use those and play off of those, use that as the basis to create something really special.
Yeah, we'll have to do a follow-up in the future that, touches on the best video game adaptations into TV shows. But let's jump into the upcoming Gamescom show that's going to be happening. Technically, we're recording this on Monday night. The Gamescom is happening tomorrow night. There's supposed to be a lot of stuff there. Supposed to have some game information about the Outlast trials, Gotham Knights, High on Life, Honkai Star Rail, Hogwarts Legacy, the Callisto Protocol, The Expanse, Dying Light 2, Sonic Frontiers, Return to Monkey Island, and Goat Simulator 3. So, Brian, I'm just curious, is there anything coming out with Gamescom that you're looking forward to? Anything that you're expecting? Or, is it just another show that's going to have some interesting stuff, some not interesting stuff, and we'll just have to wait and see. What do you think?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if we get anything in terms of reveals that we aren't expecting. If there's anything at that show that, that anyone's been holding back. I love that Goat Simulator 3 is the sequel to Goat Simulator. It's just fits right in with what we've seen out of that so far.
Reminds me of Winamp back in the day. For those of you that are old enough to remember Winamp, the MP3 player went from 1 to 2 to 3 to 5. And I think that was it, right? 1, 2 to 5? 1, 2, 3, 5? I don't know. But
something like that, yes.
It's almost as bad as Microsoft's naming schemes with... Windows 3, Windows 3, Windows 95, 98, ME 2000, somewhere in there we get 7 out of nowhere.
Yep. Or you could look at the Xbox naming scheme. Microsoft is famously bad at this, right?
It's the
360 and then we're gonna Xbox One. Yeah, that's what everybody actually calls the first Xbox, so I guess we can't call it that anymore.
And I saw a forum recently where somebody was angry because there was a game coming out for the Xbox Series X, but they misread it thinking that it would be available for the Xbox One X, which of course is last gen. And so they're mad that it's not available for their last gen console because it's a Series X only. How confusing.
Classic Microsoft.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on this one. I think it's, we'll probably see a lot of updates on stuff that we're already expecting. I don't actually expect to see much of anything new there. But, probably just maybe 1 or 2 things we weren't expecting, but nothing major. But we'll see. So.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if we saw like a major announcement, that no one was expecting. It's always fun when that happens. But hey, at least we'll hopefully see some cool new footage and so on for games that people are really anticipating.
Speaking of things being announced that we are expecting, they did announce that PlayStation VR 2 is going to arrive in early 2023. This comes to us from an article on Kotaku. It says PlayStation VR is going to arrive in early 2023. They have announced out of nowhere that their next-gen console is going to arrive early 23. Announcement came via PlayStation's global social media accounts, including PlayStation. This is Australia, but yeah, so... for everybody looking forward to the next generation of PlayStation VR, that is coming up next year, which, as my wife reminded me recently, next year is just 4 months away. So for everybody that is feeling like 23 is too far off, it's just around the corner. So what do you think? Are you going to... You don't have a PlayStation, right? You're probably not very excited about the PlayStation VR 2.
I am an Xbox guy. We do have a Quest 2 in the house for VR. I think this is great, though. It's VR is kind of this nascent, fertile field, I think, that exists in games, and I think there's a lot left to happen in that space. And I think probably the most exciting things in VR are probably things that don't exist yet. So it'll be cool to see, what developers are able to do with this new, this latest tech. And I don't know in terms of what PlayStation has planned for the VR 2, if there's going to be any, hardware or software features that are going to be, kind of groundbreaking, but I'll be curious to see if that sort of thing happens.
Yeah, I know we've heard that the PlayStation VR 2 is going to have a 2000 by 2040 resolution per eye. It's going to have an OLED screen that refreshes at 90 or 120 hertz. The thing I think is biggest about it is their field of view is 110 degrees, which is pretty wide compared to what we've seen in VR headsets in the past. But, I think the OLED to me is the most exciting thing, the OLED HDR, where... Right now, I think the biggest thing holding the Oculus back, or the Quest, or the Meta, depending on what you call it, is that it's not an OLED screen. So you don't have that depth and that richness. And I think the field of view is a major thing holding VR back there. That being said, the PlayStation VR 2 being next gen and being very exciting is still tethered. You still actually have to plug a physical cable into your physical PlayStation. And so I think for that reason, I still am just blown away by the Meta Quest 2 and what it can do, considering that it's completely wireless, completely standalone. I can take it on an airplane and I could technically play VR in the middle of the airport terminal with no tethering, no extra devices required. So, but I think you're right. I absolutely agree that PlayStation and VR together is an amazing combo, and VR in general to me is just amazing to see what is at the very forefront of what's possible. That, if this is the first generation of modern VR, imagine the fifth generation. I mean, it's going to be, just pull on some snowboard goggles and suddenly feel like you're snowboarding. So it's amazing to see the iterations of things over time.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that VR really sorely needs is sort of mainstream adoption. And so, if this VR 2 headset for PlayStation can take off and help launch that, I think that'd be great for, the VR industry in general. And again, towards giving us some of those experiences that are going to be awesome and don't exist yet and can't exist on, kind of existing architecture, existing hardware. So, sort of the sort of 2D, 3D experience in terms of, instead of, really living it in VR where you're looking around and able to experience 3D in an all new way.
Yeah. So speaking of things that are coming out that are the next generation of things, you've got an announcement about a next generation of something coming out.
I do. And I think we were talking about the McLaren launching a production car based on a video game car. This is the Solus GT, based on a car that they debuted in Gran Turismo Sport for the PlayStation 4 back in 2017. So they actually went ahead and built a real-world version of this car, which is, in a way, totally insane, like making a digital thing now a reality. Even if this isn't like going to be a fully production car, the fact that they built a working concept is totally crazy.
Well, and I have to wonder, I'm assuming that there's enough that goes into designing a digital car that if you're going to take that digital model and make it a real car, hopefully it's somewhat aerodynamic, right? Hopefully it's somewhere in the vein of realistic, car design principles. But it does beg the question of is good digital car design good physical car design? And to me, it begs the question of how pop culture influences our real world stuff. I mean, could you see other video game cars that go from being video game cars to being production cars, or go from being a toy to being a real thing? I remember the first time that I saw at the LA Auto Show, they had a real live transforming car that was like 40 feet tall. And so watching that, even though I wasn't that into Transformers, going from Transformers, the TV show and the toys, to seeing a real life concept was like, holy cow, it's amazing. The other thing that it makes me think about is, the way that pop culture influences our real life, and especially in the vein of cars, that we have the announcement today that the DeLorean Alpha 5 has been revealed. This came out a couple days ago. And of course, the DeLorean, a vehicle that by and large was not a popular car when it came out, and was actually a pretty poorly reviewed and poorly rated car. And yet, because of its beloved nature in the Back to the Future series, it kind of has a cultural place in our hearts, to the point that they were able to actually revive the DeLorean Motor Company and now bring us a new electric car. So, Brian, what do you think about the new DeLorean, or the concept of digital and pop media bringing us physical world things?
Yeah, it's I think part of it too is this transition to electric cars has really opened things up in terms of the possibility of some crazy ideas getting launched. And so I think maybe something where this concept maybe would have been much harder to pull off a few years ago, but now with the specific place that we're in with electric cars, it feels like that time that we're going to see some companies really take some crazy chances that may or may not work out. I think it would be awesome if the DeLorean was a huge success. This electric version of the DeLorean, I think it looks really cool. But the other aspect of it is this, sort of digital to real, thing that we're seeing more of. And I think that trend is going to continue. I really do. Part of it, I think, is the fidelity that we're seeing in games and other media, in terms of the models and so on. You have to build them to such a realistic degree that, maybe it's easier at that point to launch a real product from such a complete model. Also simulating physics and so on, especially in, obviously we're looking at cars as the example, and that's a great place in terms of the realism and the amount of simulation that we're doing in modern games. I think it's safe to say that most of the cars that they would build digitally that don't really exist would probably be workable vehicles in the real world. Like, if you put an engine in it and make a real vehicle that matches the specs, it's probably going to perform pretty close to, the car in the game.
Yeah, and I think the analogy here too, that I find interesting, and I'd love to, maybe we'll have another segment and tease this out a little bit more. I know you and I are kind of pushed for time recording right now, but I'd love to tease out a little bit more the concept of world building and the concept of creating something out of nothing, and how we do that in the church. Even you go from I think about Paul in the early church, and really was like this gathering of people, and eventually it became letter writing campaign between Paul and these early gatherings, and how those things that were really just analogous to digital communication, right? I mean, it was just somebody talking about something, putting it down in a Google Doc, and yet those things built real physical churches all over the place. So maybe we'll tease that out again in another future segment. But for now, Brian, I just want to say thank you for coming on. Thank you for joining me on the Crossfire podcast. And it was a pleasure having you. Any last words for our audience?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I'm trying to fill Russ's shoes, obviously. Pretty hard to do that. I know you and Russ have a great rapport, and you're pretty practiced at this, so I did my best. hopefully it was fun for anybody who's tuning in. Thanks for having me, David.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. And as always, God bless everybody, and we'll catch you online.